They did not give Harriet Sumwell a chair. There were 9 at the long table that evening, and covers laid for 9. A 10th place was set at the sideboard, which is to say no place at all. The 10th person was expected to stand. So she stood. She stood at the sideboard behind her uncle's chair, with her father's green field book open across both hands. She read out the figures when she was told to read them. The rest of the time, she was silent, which was most of the time. "The lower water meadow," her uncle said, without turning his head. "The rents, Harriet." Slowly. She read the rents. £3 and some shillings for the ings below the weir. A figure for the mowing. A figure for the aftermath grazing. A figure for the eel rights that no one had troubled to collect in years. Her feet had begun to ache an hour ago. She read on in a level voice, because a level voice was the one thing they could not take from her, and she had learned long since to keep it. This was the cruelty of the house, and it left no marks. No one struck her. No one raised a hand or a voice. They simply arranged the world so that she was never in a chair, never at the table, never a person one addressed. She was a use. She fetched and poured and read out figures and stood. A blow heals. A body kept standing at a sideboard for 3 hours every evening of its life learns a different lesson. It learns that it is furniture. She had refused, quietly, to learn it. That refusal lived in the level of her voice, and they could not find where she kept it, and it drove her uncle to distraction. At the head of the table sat the Duke of Wesley, and no one spoke to him. That was the strange fact of the room, stranger even than the standing niece. They spoke about him. They spoke near him. They spoke toward the general air above his plate. They did not speak to him. Her uncle addressed his remarks to the candlesticks. Her aunt addressed hers to the soup. Her cousin Olympia turned her lovely profile to the light and laughed softly at things no one had said to her. The Duke ate almost nothing. He was a tall, still man of 32, dark-haired, with eyes so near to black that the candlelight found no colour in them. His face did not move. Harriet knew his history, because she knew everything the house knew, and was told nothing on purpose. 3 springs ago, his younger brother had drowned at the weir on the boundary of the 2 estates. The old sluice had given way in a flood. The county had decided, on no evidence but its own fear, that a man so cold and hard must somehow have let it break. Perhaps he had wished the money spared. Perhaps he was simply the kind of man such things happened to. The story did not need to be true to be repeated. It only needed to be frightening. And it was. Since then, people had stopped speaking to the Duke of Wesley directly. They spoke to his steward. They spoke to the space where a warmer man might once have stood. He had come tonight to hear the terms of a marriage. That, at least, Harriet had gathered. The 2 families meant to be joined, the 2 estates merged, the long quarrel over the water ended by a wedding. It was her uncle's grand design, 3 months in the building. She had not been consulted. She never was. She was there to read out rents. "Come," said her uncle, pleasant as ever. "The tenant list, Harriet. From the top." She turned the page. The candle at her elbow guttered and steadied. She had read 4 names when the Duke set down his glass and looked, for the first time all evening, at the woman standing behind her uncle's chair. "The weir," he said. His voice was low and little used, like a hinge that has not turned in a long while. "Who keeps it now?" The table stopped. A fork touched a plate and was still. Her uncle's smile did not change, but a muscle moved in his cheek. The Duke had asked a question of the room, and the room did not know how to answer a man it had agreed to fear. The silence stretched. It became unbearable. Her aunt looked at her plate. Olympia looked at the candles. Her uncle looked very hard at nothing and did not speak, because to speak to the Duke was a thing that was simply not done in this house any longer, and he could not remember how. Harriet answered him. "No one keeps it, Your Grace," she said. "That is why your meadow floods." Somewhere down the table, her aunt drew a sharp breath. Olympia's soft laugh died half-born. Her uncle turned in his chair at last, and the pleasantness had worn thin over the top of something colder. But the Duke was not looking at any of them. He was looking at Harriet. The stillness of his face had changed by a single degree, the way a frozen field changes when the first thaw comes into it, before anything at all has moved. "Explain," he said. She should have stopped. She knew she should stop. Her uncle's eyes were on her, and she would pay for this later, in the small coin the house paid her in. But no one had asked her a question in a very long time. No one had waited for her answer. The novelty of it undid her caution. "The sluice was mended badly after it broke," she said. "They set the new gate too high and too narrow. In an ordinary year, it will hold. In a wet spring, the water backs up above it and takes the bank instead. It took your lower meadow last April. It will take it again this April, and the April after that. It will go on taking it until someone lowers the gate and widens the race." She closed the book upon her thumb. "It is drawn plainly in my father's survey. I could show you the fall of the ground if you wish to see it." "That will do," her uncle said. His voice was very smooth. "It will not," said the Duke of Wesley. For a long moment, no one in that room breathed. Harriet stood with the green book against her ribs, her aching feet planted on the cold floor. She understood, dimly and all at once, that she had done a thing that could not be taken back. She had spoken to him. She had answered him plainly, as one answers a person, and she had watched something stir awake in a face the whole county swore was dead. The Duke said no more that night. He rose not long after, gave his stiff thanks to the candlesticks, as everyone gave everything to the candlesticks in that house, and went out to his carriage. But at the door he paused. He looked back once, across the ruin of the cold dinner, to the girl standing at the sideboard with her father's book. He did not smile. His face was not built for it, but he inclined his head to her, a small grave courtesy, the kind one man gives another when a debt has been noted. Then he was gone into the dark, and her uncle turned upon her the face he kept for when the guests had left. She was up before the house the next morning, as she was every morning. That was the shape of her days, and had been for 13 years. She rose in the dark. She laid the fires the maids had no time for. She did the accounts her uncle could not do and would not learn. She carried the keys. She settled the tradesmen. She knew to the ounce what was in the larder, the cellar, and the strong box. The Grange ran because she ran it, quietly, invisibly, from before dawn until after dark. No one thanked her for it, any more than one thanks a hinge for turning. She had stopped waiting to be thanked a long while ago. A woman who waits to be thanked in such a house grows bitter, and bitterness, she had decided while still young, was only one more way of letting them win. She had not always been furniture. She could still remember being a daughter. Her father had been a quiet man, a younger son with a small property, and a great love of the land itself. He had taught her to read a field the way other fathers taught their sons to read Latin. He had walked her along the Ings from the time she could first walk at all. He named the grasses for her. He showed her how the water lay in the ground. He set the heavy spirit glass in her small hands and let her take the levels herself. The meadow was his life's one small masterpiece. He had drained it, mown it, drawn it, and loved it. When he died of a winter fever, he left it to her, not to his brother, not to the estate, to her, because he knew, even dying, exactly what his brother was. "Keep the book," he had told her at the very end, pressing the green survey into her hands. "Whatever else they take from you, the book is the land, and the land is yours. Read it until you know it by heart. Then no one can ever take it, because it will be inside you, where their hands cannot reach." She had done as he asked. She had read it until she knew it by heart. At 11, she had not understood why it should matter so much. At 24, she was beginning to understand. She went down to the meadow that morning, as she often did when the house had wounded her. The mist lay low and white on the water. The broken weir stood neglected in the grey light, hung wrong, pinching the river. She stood at the edge of the one thing in the world that was hers. She did not weep. Tears were exactly what the house wanted from her, and she had learned a long time ago to keep them. She looked at the water instead, and thought of the Duke's low, unused voice, asking who kept the weir now, and of her own voice answering him without fear. She had frightened herself, answering him. Standing there in the cold mist, she was not entirely sure she was sorry. The merger had been 3 months in the making, and Harriet had not been asked her opinion of any of it. The 2 estates lay along one river. Holmhurst stood on the far bank, great and rich and silent, 40 years in the Wesley family. Sumwell Grange stood on the near bank, mortgaged to the chimney pots, kept up on credit and appearance by her Uncle Godwin. He had married the last of the family money, and had spent it slowly on the look of a fortune he no longer had. Between the 2 houses ran the disputed water and the disputed weir. There had been a suit over the water rights since before Harriet was born. It was a slow, expensive, unwinnable thing. It ate a little of both houses every year, and neither could afford to lose, and neither could afford to win. Her uncle's answer to it was a marriage. Join the 2 families, he told anyone who would listen, and the quarrel dissolves of itself. The lands lie together. The water belongs to one house at last. It was a union that neither party had chosen, and both could see the plain sense of. The Duke wanted the quarrel ended, and the water settled. Her uncle wanted the connection, the credit a Duke's cousinship would buy, and one thing more, which he named to no one. The bride, of course, was to be Olympia. Olympia was 23, the beauty of 2 counties, and she had been raised from the cradle for exactly this. She was an ornament made to sit at the top of a great table, a face built to carry a coronet. She played and sang and rode and said the right nothing to the right people at the right moment. She had never in her life read a rent roll, or walked a wet field, or been made to stand through a dinner. That was Harriet's office. Harriet was the poor niece, the dead brother's girl, taken in at 11 when her own father died. She had been kept ever since because she was useful and asked for nothing and could be made to stand. What none of them said aloud, what her uncle in particular took great care never to say, was that the keystone of the whole merger did not belong to him at all. The lower water meadow, the ings, with the weir upon it, the eel rights, the best hay in the parish, had come to Harriet from her father. It came to her outright in his will when she was a child of 11. It was the one thing in the world that was hers. Her uncle had drawn its rents for 13 years as her guardian. He had come, by long habit, to think of those rents as his own. He had let everyone believe the meadow was Grange land, land that would pass with the marriage. The Duke believed it. The lawyers drawing the settlement believed it. It was not so. The meadow would pass with Harriet, or it would not pass at all. Her uncle had staked everything upon the hope that no one would open the book and read the plain truth before the settlement was signed. The mortgages, the credit, the coronet for his daughter, all of it rested on that single silence. Harriet had read the book. She read it most nights by a stub of candle, in the cold room under the eaves. She knew whose meadow it was. She had simply never, until that dinner, been given a reason to say so out loud. Her uncle came up to her room that night with a candle, which he did not often trouble to do. "You made a spectacle of yourself," he said. "I answered a question, sir. You will not answer him again. You will not speak to the man at all unless I bid you to." He set the candle on the sill. In its light, his face was handsome still, and underneath the handsomeness was something she had no word for yet. "A great deal hangs upon the next fortnight, Harriet. More than you can guess. You will stand where you are put. You will hold your tongue. When it is done, I will see you comfortably settled somewhere out of the way. A cottage, perhaps. A small annuity. You would like that. Peace, and a garden, and no one to trouble you. I should like my own meadow," she said. The candle flame jumped. For a single instant, the pleasant mask was gone entirely, and she saw the thing beneath it, cornered and afraid. She filed the sight away without yet knowing what it might be worth. "Your meadow," he repeated, very soft. "Be careful, girl. Be careful what you have decided is yours." He took the candle. He left her in the dark. She sat a long while at the cold window with her father's book in her lap. Across the black river, a single light burned very high up in the great house, in a window under the roof. Someone in that silent place was awake, and alone, as she was awake and alone. She watched the far light until it went out. Then she went to bed. She did not sleep. She did not know that the man no one dared to speak to had stood at that same window the whole while, looking down at the near house. Barnaby, Duke of Wesley, did not sleep the way other men slept, and had not since the flood. He had gone up that night, as he went most nights, to his brother's old room under the roof. He stood at the window, with the candle unlit, looking down at the weir that had drowned him. He had loved Rafe the way a hard man loves the one soft thing he permits himself, badly and completely, and without ever once saying so. They had quarrelled the week before the water rose. They had quarrelled about money, and about the weir, and about the very repairs that £1,000 spent and not begrudged might have made in time. Barnaby had refused the £1,000. He had called his brother a sentimental fool, He had told him to go and mend his precious weir himself, if he cared so much for a strip of wet grass. Rafe had gone. That was the thing Barnaby could not lay down. Rafe had gone down to the sluice in the storm to shift a jammed gate with his own hands, because there was no one else, and his brother would not pay for men. The bank had gone. The river had taken him. He had left a wife who did not outlive her grief at 12-month. He had left a daughter, Bess, who was 6 now, and who lived somewhere in the great house, and whom the Duke could not look at without seeing the water close over a dark head. The county had its story, and he had let the story stand. The tale the county told was no crueler than the one he told himself. So he had stopped explaining. He had stopped, very nearly, speaking at all. It was easier to be the thing they feared than to be the thing he was. The thing he was, he believed, was a man who had killed his brother with a closed hand and a hard word. He could not say it. He could not undo it. So he had built a wall of silence around the wound, high and smooth, so that no one might ever come near enough to touch it. There was the child, too, and she was the part of it he could least bear. Rafe's daughter lived somewhere below him in the great house, and he had arranged, without ever quite deciding to, never to be in a room with her. He paid for her keep. He signed whatever the steward put before him. He did not go to her. When he passed the north passage and heard the small, high voice at its solemn games, he turned and went another way. He told himself it was a kindness. The sight of him could only frighten her, he reasoned. A man such as he had no gift to give a grieving child. The truth was simpler and far worse. The girl had her father's eyes. He could not meet them, because the last thing those eyes had ever watched him do was refuse. Then a poor relation in a made-over gown had stood at a sideboard and told him, without fear and without flattery, the plain mechanics of his own guilt. They set the new gate too high and too narrow. Not you let it break. Not the hard Duke, the cold heart. A gate set wrong. A fall of ground. A thing that could be measured. A thing that could be understood. A thing? The word rose in him, and he distrusted it deeply. That could be mended. He stood at the window a long time. Below him, the near house showed one small light under its own eaves, and went dark. He thought once, clearly, of a level voice saying, "That is why your meadow floods." For the first time in 3 years, he found that he wanted the morning to come. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. The Duke's message reached Sumwell Grange the following afternoon. It did not go to her uncle. It went to Harriet. It was very short, in a hard black hand. Miss Sumwell is requested to attend the Duke of Wesley at the Lower Weir on Thursday at 11 o'clock to show him the fall of the ground. She will bring the survey. There was no softening in it. There was no courtesy beyond the bare form of the thing. Her uncle read it 3 times. He went a curious colour. He could not forbid it. A mortgaged man does not refuse a duke's request, and he did not yet understand what the request meant, and he dared not show that he did not understand. So on Thursday, Harriet walked down to the weir with her father's book under her arm. The great silent Duke was already there. He was alone, without groom or steward, standing where his brother had died. He stood as though he had appointed the place to punish himself, which he had. "Show me," he said. She showed him. She wasn't afraid of the ground. The ground was the one country in which she was wholly fluent. She walked him along the bank. She showed him where the fall of the land carried the water. She showed him where the new gate pinched it too narrow. She showed him where, in a wet year, it would climb the bank and spread into his meadow and rot the standing hay. She opened her father's survey and laid it flat on a stone. She showed him the neat dead hand, the levels taken with a spirit glass 20 years before, the whole quiet logic of the water written out by a man who had loved this small wet corner of the world. The Duke listened. That was the thing she would remember longest. He listened as no one had listened to her since her father died. He listened wholly, without impatience, without waiting for his turn to speak, as though what she knew were worth the knowing. "You could set it right," he said at last. It was not quite a question. "Anyone could set it right who would pay for it," she said. "Lower the gate a foot. Widen the race to what my father drew. Face the near bank with stone, not turf. It is 2 months' work. It is not dear. Your meadow floods because no one has cared to spend a little to stop it. That is all. There is no curse in it. Only a gate hung wrong. My brother went down to shift that gate by hand," the Duke said, "because I would not spend the little." He said it flatly, to the water, not to her. She understood at once that it was the first time he had said it aloud to any living soul. She knew the weight of a thing set down for the first time. She did not tell him it was not his fault. She did not yet know whether it was, and he would have heard the lie in it. She did not touch him. She let the silence hold what it held, the way she had learned to let her own silences hold things through 100 cruel dinners. "The gate was set wrong afterward," she said, when the quiet had run long enough. "Whatever came before, it is set wrong now. That much a man can mend whatever else he cannot." He turned and looked at her fully. Something in the dark face had cracked, very slightly, along a line that had been sealed a long while. "You are the only person in 3 years," he said, "who has spoken to me as though I were a man, and not a verdict." "You asked me a question, Your Grace," she said. "I am in the habit of answering questions. No one had asked me one in some while either." For an instant, she would have sworn to it after, the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, the almost of a smile. Then it was gone. He was the Duke of Wesley again. He said he would send men to the weir on Monday, and that she would direct them, and he walked away up the bank without another word. He left her by the river with her father's book, and the strangest feeling she had carried in years. It was the feeling of having been seen. The work at the weir went forward, and Harriet directed it, and the county did not know what to make of any of it. She went down each morning to the water. She stood among the labourers in her plain gown, with the green book open in her hands. She told them where to sink the stone, how low to hang the new gate, where to face the bank. They did as she said, partly because she was plainly right, partly because the Duke had commanded it. He came most days himself. He said little. He stood at a small distance and watched the race widen. He watched the bank take its facing of grey stone. Now and then he asked a question. She answered it. Slowly, over the wet, cold mornings, a thing grew up between them that neither of them named or dared to. One raw morning, she came to the weir to find a stool set on the bank where she liked to stand. It was a plain thing, a joint stool carried down from the great house. It was placed square on the driest patch of ground, with the survey stone set beside it to hold her book. No one told her who had put it there. The labourers only touched their caps and said nothing. But she saw the Duke, some way off along the bank, looking very hard at the water, and not at her, in the manner of a man who does not wish to be thanked. She understood him. She had spent 13 years not being given a chair, standing at sideboards until her feet ached, made into furniture at the edge of other people's comfort. He had said not a single word about it. He had simply seen that she was kept standing, and had quietly put an end to it, in the only way a silent man knew how. She sat down on the stool. She opened her book. She did not thank him, because he plainly did not want thanks, and because some kindnesses are spoiled by being named aloud. But that evening she could not stop thinking of the plain little stool, set square on the dry ground for her. It undid something in her that all the years of cruelty had only ever made harder. It was at Holmhurst that she met the child. The Duke had asked her to come up to the great house and go over the estate drainage with his steward. He asked stiffly, as though the words cost him coin. She knew the land better than any man he paid, and he had brought himself to admit it. She went. Holmhurst was as she had imagined it, and worse. It was vast, hushed, beautiful, and cold as a stone church in December. The servants moved on soft feet and dropped their eyes as she passed. No one laughed. In the whole great pile there seemed to be but one small human sound, thin and high and busy. She followed it down a passage and found a little girl of 6 sitting alone on the floor of a north room, dressing a wooden horse in a scrap of black cloth for a funeral. "He drowned," the child explained, matter of fact, when Harriet crouched down beside her. "Like my papa. So he has to have a black." "Then he must have the very best black there is," said Harriet. She tore a proper strip from her own petticoat hem. She helped the child dress the wooden horse for its grief. She did not once tell her not to think of such things. The girl's name was Bess. She was Ralph's daughter, the Duke's ward, and she lived in that silent house like a coin dropped behind a chest. She had been tidied out of sight, because the sight of her hurt the one man who ought to have loved her most. The servants were kind to her, and frightened of the whole matter. No one played with her. No one, it seemed, had told her a single true thing she was not already afraid of. So she had gone straight to the middle of the fear, and set up house there, in the north room, burying wooden horses that had drowned. "You are not afraid of him," Bess observed, watching Harriet's face with a child's frank attention. "Everybody is afraid of my uncle. You are not." "No," said Harriet, and found it was true. "I don't believe I am." "Why?" She considered the honest answer, and gave it because the child deserved one. "Because I think he is only very sad. And I have never once in my life learned to be afraid of sad." Behind her, in the doorway, the Duke of Wesley had come without a sound, and stood a moment too long. He heard her say it. He went away again without a word, so that neither of them should see his face. The Dowager Duchess of Wesley was the one soul at Holmhurst who had never learned to fear her grandson, and she meant to keep it that way. Her name was Verena. She was old and upright and sharp as a good knife, and she had watched the great house freeze over 3 winters with a fury she kept behind a mild face. She had buried a husband and a son and a grandson's soul, and she was not minded to bury the last of the family's warmth without a fight. She had noticed a great many things lately. She had noticed the mended weir. She had noticed her grandson coming down to dinner. She had noticed, above all, the plain young woman from the near house who spoke to Barnaby as though he were a person, and to whom he answered. She sent for Harriet within the week. "Sit down, child," she said, which no one at the Grange had said to Harriet in 13 years. "There, in the chair. I am too old to talk up at a person who is standing. You have a look of being always about to fetch something. Stop it." Harriet sat. It felt very strange. The old woman studied her over a cup of chocolate, with eyes the exact black of her grandson's. "You told him his weir was hung wrong," the dowager said. "To his face, at your uncle's table, where the fish knives were doubtless afraid of him." A dry gleam. "Do you know, no one has told that man an inconvenient truth in 3 years? They creep about him. They speak to that dreadful steward. They have all agreed he is a monster, because it is easier than remembering he is a boy who lost his brother and cannot forgive himself. And along you come, and read him his rents, and tell him his gate is too narrow." She set down the cup. "I could kiss you for it. I shall not, but I could." "I only answered him, ma'am," said Harriet. "Yes," said Verena. "That is precisely the miracle of it." She was quiet a moment. Then, with the bluntness of the very old, she said, "There is to be a marriage, they tell me. My grandson and some beauty from your uncle's house. A merger of ditches. I am to gain a granddaughter chosen for her acreage." She looked at Harriet very steadily. "It will not be you, I suppose. It is never the one it ought to be." Harriet's face gave nothing away, because it had 13 years of practice. But something moved behind it, and the old woman saw the something and was satisfied. "Come and read to me on Thursdays," the dowager said, as though it were settled, which it now was. "My eyes are going. And bring the child. That house has kept her in a cupboard long enough. If my grandson cannot bear the sight of his brother's daughter, then he had best learn to bear it, and you are plainly the person to teach him. Off you go." So Harriet came to Holmhurst on Thursdays, and after a little while, on other days too, for the child's sake, and the old woman's, and one other reason she did not examine closely. That was the beginning of the thaw, though it did not look like much while it happened, which is the way of thaws. There was always a reason for her to come. The drainage, the weir, a question of the home farm, the dowager's failing eyes, the child. The reasons grew thinner as the weeks went on, and no one remarked on it, because the household had discovered that the great house was warmer when Harriet was in it. She brought Bess out of the north room. She had the child at the weir in stout boots, learning the names of the parts of the water. She had her in the kitchen garden with earth on her hands. She had her, once, up on the Duke's own knee at the library fire. That had not happened in 3 years. Barnaby sat very rigid, his dead brother's daughter warm against his chest, his arms not quite knowing how to close. He looked over the small, dark head at Harriet across the firelight. His expression had no name that she knew, and she would not forget it as long as she lived. That night, alone, Barnaby sat by the fire in the room where it had happened, and made himself look at the thing squarely, the way she had taught him to look at the weir. For 3 years He had believed that warmth had died in him along with his brother. It had not died. It had only gone underground, the way a spring goes underground in a drought, and waited. Then a grey woman had come walking over his land with a dead man's book. She had knelt on his floor to dress a wooden horse for its funeral. She had set his brother's child upon his knee, as though it were the most natural thing in all the world. And the buried spring had found its slow way back up toward the light. He did not yet know what he meant to do about her. He knew only that the house was warmer when she was in it, exactly as his grandmother had said. He had begun, God help him, to measure the worth of his days by the sound of her voice down at the water. He began to speak. Not much. He was a spare man, and would always be a spare man. But the 2-word answers began to lengthen. He told her, one evening, about Rafe. Not the drowning, but the brother. The boy who had ridden too hard and laughed too loud and forgiven too easily. The whole living person the county had let him forget in favor of a grave. She listened as he had once listened to her at the water. She gave him the same gift he had given her, her whole attention. No verdict. He asked her to dine at Holmhurst, which he had asked no one to do in 3 years. The great table there seated 40, and had been laid for 2 at its far ends, a mile of cold mahogany between them, in the way such houses do a thing without ever thinking about it. Harriet looked down the long, polished waist of it, to the Duke set so far off, he was scarcely more than a dark shape against the candles. Then she did the thing she always did with wrongly set things. She corrected it. Your Grace, she said, I cannot hear you from here, and I find I should like to. Might we not sit nearer to one another? A table this size is very grand. It is also very lonely. I have had my fill of lonely tables, and would gladly be done with them. There was a silence. The footman went rigid. One did not rearrange a duke at his own board. Then Barnaby looked down the long table at her, and something moved at the corner of his mouth, the almost of a smile again. Move the covers, he said, both to this end, and take the leaves out of the table tomorrow. All of them. The steward blinked. The thing was done. They dined close enough to pass the salt by hand. They talked, haltingly, of the land, and the child, and 100 small, ordinary things. It was the first meal Harriet had eaten, sitting down, as a person, at a table where she was wanted, in 13 long years. She noticed, afterward, that he had the leaves taken out, and never once put back. And once, only once, she saw him wholly undone. It was late. The house was asleep. She had stayed past her hour, going over the spring accounts by a single lamp. She came upon him in Rafe's old room under the roof, standing at the window with his candle out and his shoulders bowed. He was weeping without a sound, the way men weep who have taught themselves for years that they must not. He did not hear her. She might have gone. She did not go. She crossed the dark room and stood beside him at the glass, not touching him, only there. After a while, his hand found the sill, an inch from her own, and stayed. I said, "Get out of my sight," he told the window at last. The last words I ever gave him. Over a weir. Over £1,000. His breath shook badly. The river took him, and I have never once been able to say I was sorry. There is no one left to say it to. "Say it to me," said Harriet. And he did. He turned from the window in the dark, and he said it to her, brokenly, the whole sorrow of 3 years. She held it for him the way she had learned to hold the level of her own voice through year upon year of silent suppers. steadily, so that it did not spill. It was the middle of the night. Nothing was declared. Nothing was promised. But when she walked home across the bridge in the dark before dawn, she understood that this thing, whatever it was, had passed the place where it could be undone. That frightened her more than her uncle had ever managed to. His grandmother came to his study the next morning, uninvited, and sat down across from him as though she owned the chair, which she did. "You are going to marry the wrong woman," Verena said, without preamble. "I have watched you drift toward it like a man walking in his sleep toward a cliff edge. I will not stand at the graveside of this family's last warmth and hold my tongue about it. So I shall say it once, plainly. Then I shall drink your very bad chocolate and go." "There is a settlement," Barnaby said. "There is a merger. The two houses have agreed the thing." The two houses. She made the words sound like something scraped off a boot. "You are a duke, child, not a field to be enclosed by Act of Parliament. Yet you speak of yourself as so much acreage." She leaned forward, black eyes hard. "Answer me one honest thing, since you have grown so fond of honesty of late. The young woman who reads to me on Thursdays, the one who is not afraid of you. When she is in a room, is the room warmer or colder?" He did not answer. His silence was its own answer, and they both knew it perfectly well. "I thought as much," said Verena. She drank her chocolate and made a face at it. "Your brother is dead. You did not kill him. You were unkind to him once, over money, as brothers are unkind. And then the river did a thing that no man living could undo. You have spent 3 years calling ordinary grief a murder. Because a murder at least gives you a culprit, you may go on punishing forever. Very well, punish yourself, if you must have it so. But do not marry a beautiful stranger for a strip of wet grass and call it your duty. Not while the one person who speaks to you as to a living man walks home each night across that bridge to a house that uses her worse than it uses its own horses." She rose, upright and terrible and very old. "That is all I came to say. You may go back now to being frightening. It works on everyone in the county but me, and it has never once, from the first day, worked on her." She left him alone with the cooling chocolate and the truth of it. He sat a long while, not moving. Outside his window, far down at the water, a plain figure in a grey gown bent over a stool with a green book, showing his men where to sink the stone. He watched her until the light failed, and he did not send for candles. Her uncle, meanwhile, had begun to be afraid in earnest. He was not a stupid man. He was only a weak and desperate one, which is a different thing, and often a worse one. He could count. He counted the mornings his niece spent at the great house. He counted the Duke's postponed settlement and his own postponed creditors. He counted, above all, the days until the marriage he had staked everything upon slid quietly out of his grasp. It was not his daughter the Duke went down to the weir to meet. It was not Olympia the old dowager sent for on Thursdays. We are taught by stories to hate such men, and it is easy to hate them, until we sit with one for a moment in the small hours as he does his sums. Godwin Sumwell had built his whole ruined house upon a single card. The coronet would come to Olympia. The Duke's money would clear the mortgages. The little difficulty of the meadow's true owner would drown, unnoticed, in the general flood of the merger. Now the card was turning slowly in his hand. He could see the ruin plainly behind it. The sold plate, the sold horses, the cheap lodgings in some town where no one knew his name. He did the thing that frightened men do when they can see the wall coming. He decided to make certain of the meadow before the truth could come out. If Harriet could not be kept quiet, then Harriet must be shown to have no meadow to be quiet about. He sent to the county town for a man of law, a supple, expensive man with a soft voice and no scruples worth the name. Together, over 3 long evenings, they built the thing. They built a claim that the Ings had never truly passed to the child at all, that her father's will had been ambiguous, that 13 years of the uncle's management had ripened into a right, that the meadow was Grange land and always had been, whatever a girl might say. It was thin. But law is not truth, and thin claims win, when the other side has no book to answer them with. The book. It always came back to the book. So on the 4th evening, while Harriet was up at Holmhurst reading to the Dowager, her uncle went up to her cold room under the eaves. He took her father's green survey out of the box beneath her bed. He carried it down the stairs. He locked it in his own iron strong box. He told himself, turning the key, that a girl could hardly prove a title with a book she could no longer put her hand on. He had forgotten, because men like him always forget the one thing, that his niece had read that book 1,000 times by candlelight. He had made her read it aloud for years. The proof he had locked away was already loose in the world, in the only place he could not reach it. Olympia found the meadow business distasteful, which surprised her, and she considered coldly why it should. She was not a cruel girl. She was a beautiful one, which is a different thing, and sometimes a harder one to be, because the world gives a beautiful girl a single trade, and then despises her for practicing it. She had been made for this marriage, as a knife is made for cutting. She did not love the Duke. She had never expected to love anyone. Love was not in the settlement, and she had not been raised to look for it. What she felt, sitting in the cold drawing-room and watching her father's face turn greyer over his letters, was the beginning of a fear she had no practice at managing. It was the fear of a woman raised for one thing, who can feel that one thing beginning to fail. "You might have him yet," her mother said one evening, over the needlework, "if the cousin were out of the way." "He does not look at me," Olympia said. It was the truest thing she had said in a year. "He never once looked at me the way he looks at her over the accounts. I am the finest thing in any room I walk into. He looks at me the way a man looks at good furniture." She turned her lovely profile to the cold window. She stands up at a sideboard and reads him Rents, in a gown 3 seasons old. He looks at her as though she were the only warm thing in England. I have watched him do it. "Then we must ruin her," her mother said, comfortably, threading her needle. "And quickly, before he thinks of offering." Olympia was silent. She had been about to say something else, something that might have been the beginning of a different life. She looked at her mother's calm hands, and her father's grey face at the writing desk, and the whole cold machine that had built her, piece by piece, into a thing for the top of a table. She said nothing. She let it go forward. That was her weakness. Not malice. The failure of nerve to want a thing she had never been permitted to want. She would pay for that failure in time, and the paying would be the slow making of her. But that came later. This was now. Now she folded her hands and let her father and mother reach for the meadow. The blow fell in April. In the wet spring, the weir had been mended just in time to meet. The rain came in for 4 days without ceasing. The river rose brown and loud. On the 5th night, word ran up from the low farms that the water was over the meadows below the grange. The old talk woke in the county like a fever. The weir will go again. The Duke's weir. Another death coming. Half the near bank cottages stood in the flood's path, poor places, full of children. And her uncle, seeing in the confusion the chance he had been waiting for, sent his tame lawyer's letter up to Holmhurst that very night. It was a formal claim to the Ings. It was a warning that Miss Sumwell had no standing to meddle in the works at the weir. It was a demand that the merger go forward on its proper footing, with the proper bride. The letter reached the great house at midnight. So did Harriet. She came up the long drive on foot in the streaming dark, without a bonnet, her hair plastered to her face. Behind her came the households of the near farms, frightened, carrying what they could. She had done the sum the county was too afraid to do. She knew the new weir would hold. She knew the old danger lay elsewhere, at the mill race above it, where a hatch her father's book showed plainly had been left blocked for years. Open the upper hatch, spread the flood water wide and shallow across the high, empty upland Ings, exactly as her father had drawn it. The cottages below would stand. Leave the hatch blocked, and the water would take the low row in the dark. It would drown a child in its bed. It would give the county its second grave, and its final proof that the Duke's ground was cursed. She stood dripping in the great cold hall. She told the Duke of Wesley all of it, plainly, in front of his steward and his frightened servants, and the lawyer's letter lying open on the table. Then she watched him choose. He could believe the letter, and the county, and 3 years of being the hard man they had made of him. Or he could believe the woman in the streaming gown, who had never lied to him about anything. "Open the upper hatch," said the Duke of Wesley to his steward. He did not take his eyes from Harriet as he said it. "Do everything Miss Sumwell tells you. Everything to the letter. Go now. Run." They opened the hatch in the black rain. Harriet and the Duke and every man Holmhurst could raise from its beds. It was brutal work and cold past feeling. The hatch had been jammed and silted for years, and 3 strong men together could not shift it. So Harriet went down into the freezing race herself, to her waist, the lantern light jumping on the brown water. She found the old iron catch her father's book had drawn, and she worked it loose with her own numb hands, while the Duke held her fast by the arm against the drag of the flood. Neither of them spoke. There was no breath to spare for it. There was only the river and the catch, and his hand closed hard around her arm, refusing to let the water have one more person that he loved. The flood water spread wide and shallow across the high meadow, precisely as a dead man had drawn it 20 years before. The low row stood. No one drowned. Toward dawn, soaked to the bone, black with weir mud to the elbow, the great silent Duke stood in his ruined coat on the very bank he had once been unable to look at. And he laughed. One short, astonished, wholly human sound, the first in 3 years. The water had done what a dead man's book had said it would do. The meadow he had thought a grave had saved the living instead. And on the table in the hall, in the warm and lighted house behind them, her uncle's letter still lay, claiming the very ground that had just saved the parish, over the name of the girl who had saved it. In the days after the flood, the county could not stop talking, and for once the talk did not run the Duke's way. It ran hers. They had seen it or heard it from those who had. The poor niece who had gone down into the flood to her waist in the dark. The Duke who had held her fast by the arm in the black water. The high meadow that had drunk the river and saved the low row, exactly as she had said it would. Old men who had known her father nodded over their pipes and said the girl had his eye for water, and no mistake. Women who had let her stand at their sideboards for years remembered all at once that she had always been kind to them. And running through all of it was the strangest thread of any. The Duke of Wesley had laughed aloud on the bank at dawn, like a living man. A poor niece in a ruined gown seemed somehow to be the cause of it. Only her uncle did not talk. He read the reports of the flood and the growing warmth of the parish toward his niece, and he understood that his hour was very nearly run. He looked at the claim he had built, the thin, lawyerly thing lying ready to be laid before the court, and for one moment even he could see plainly how it would look. A man suing an orphan for the very ground she had waded into a flood to save. He should have stopped then. He knew, in the cold counting part of himself, that he ought to stop. He had gone too far to stop. That is the whole small tragedy of such men, set down in a single line. They can always see the wall coming, and they can never quite bring themselves to turn the horse aside. The claim to the meadow went, as such claims do, to the county court. Her uncle had reckoned on a great many things, and had left out only one. He had left out that his niece would not run. He had taken her book. He had the law's supple servant. He had 13 years of quiet possession, a good coat, and the long habit of being believed. He had assumed she would fold, as she had always folded, quietly, into the cottage and the small annuity, and the being safely out of the way. He did not understand that the girl who had stood through 100 dinners had only been waiting, all that while, for one single thing worth standing up for. She had found it now, and it was not even the meadow. Harriet went to the Duke's own man of law, Mr. Ansell. He was a dry, decent old person who had served the family 30 years. She laid the whole case before him. She had no book to give him, but she had read the book. She sat in his dim office for 2 days. She wrote out her father's survey from memory, the levels, the acreages, the meets and bounds, the dates, every figure she had read 1,000 times by candlelight to keep her own voice level. When Mr. Ansell sent to the parish for the register, the old entries there matched her memory to the shilling. No forger could have managed that. No liar could have sustained it. The truth, it turned out, had been written down twice. Once in a book her uncle had locked away in the dark, and once in the head of the girl he had made recite it. Mr. Ansell watched her fill page after page in her level clerk's hand, never faltering, never reaching for a figure she could not find. He set down his own pen and looked at her over his spectacles with something very near to awe. "Miss Sumwell," he said, "I have practiced the law 30 years. I have never in all that time seen a title proved out of a person's memory. Books are lost, witnesses die, deeds are burned. But your father did a wiser thing than any lawyer I have ever known. He wrote his meadow into a living child, and told her to keep it safe there. He shook his old head slowly. Your uncle stole a book. It never occurred to him to steal the girl who had learned it by heart. That was his whole mistake. It will cost him everything he has. You understand, Mr. Ansell said, peering at her over his spectacles, that the surest proof of all would be the survey itself, if it still exists, if it could be produced in open court. It exists, said Harriet. My uncle has it. He took it from under my bed 3 weeks ago and locked it in his strong-box. That, said the old lawyer, with the faint pleasure of a dry man scenting a wet one's mistake, is theft of a document material to a suit. If we can show that he holds it, Miss Sumwell, we do not merely win your meadow. We hang his whole claim upon his own dishonesty, in open court, before the entire county he has spent his life trying to impress. He took off his spectacles and polished them slowly. It will not be pleasant for him. No, said Harriet. She thought of the cornered, naked thing she had seen behind the candle flame. It will not be pleasant at all. She made her hardest choice then, and told no one until it was made. She would not seek to ruin him. She would prove her title. She would take back her ground. She would stop his claim cold. But she instructed Mr. Ansell to offer her uncle, privately, before the hearing, a door out. Give up the meadow. Withdraw the false claim. Restore the book. And she would ask the court for no costs, no charge of theft, no public unmaking. Take the small allowance of dignity, she was in effect saying, that you had meant to leave to me. Her uncle refused the door. Frightened men refuse the door. It is nearly the definition of them. He could not believe she would truly stand up in a court of law and speak. He had gone too far now to go back with any grace. He told the messenger, the old pleasant smile stretched thin across his fear, that he would see his niece in the county town. The hearing was held in the assembly rooms at Marchbourne, there being no room at the courthouse large enough for the crowd. The whole county had come to see the hard duke's private business aired, and the poor niece put quietly down in her place. They did not get what they had come for. Olympia was there, at the front, pale under a fine new bonnet. Her uncle was there, handsome and grey and upright, his soft-voiced lawyer beside him, with a neat stack of papers and a neat thin claim. The Duke of Wesley was there, which no one had expected. He sat plainly among the public benches, with his brother's child's small hand held in his own. The county whispered at the sight of him, and then, oddly, fell quiet. A man who will sit in a hard chair among his own tenants for the sake of a girl's water meadow is not, after all, quite the monster they had agreed upon for 3 years. Harriet stood up when her name was called. She had stood up all her life to be erased. She stood now to be counted. It was the same body and the same level voice, and it was an entirely different thing. She gave the survey from memory, figure by figure, slow and clear, exactly as she had once been made to read it out at a cold dinner. The parish register was read against it, entry by entry, and it matched. Her uncle's lawyer rose, all soft reason, to say the survey did not exist, could not be produced, was plainly a fiction of the young woman's invention, got up for the occasion. Then Mr. Ansell rose, dry as an autumn stick, and asked the court very mildly to require the box. He had done his work well. He had a sworn word from a discharged Grange servant that the Green Book had been carried, 3 weeks since, from Miss Sumwell's room to her uncle's strong box. He asked, mild as milk, that the box be sent for. And her uncle, Godwin Sumwell, who had built his whole life upon never once being asked the one plain question, stood in that crowded room and felt the floor tilt under him. He could not, in front of the county he had spent 40 years impressing, refuse the box without confessing the book. He could not produce the book without confessing the theft, and the truth written plainly inside it, in a dead man's careful hand. He looked, in that moment, at his niece. She looked back at him. She was not gloating. That was the thing that finished him in the end. She was only sorry. Steadily, quietly sorry. The way she had once been steadily kind to a child burying a wooden horse. He had offered her a cottage, safely out of the way. She had offered him a door, safely out of the ruin. Neither of them had taken the thing the other held out. Only one of them had had the power to make the refusal matter, and it had not been him. The box was sent for. The book was in it. The truth was read into the record in open court. The Ings were Harriet Sumwells. They had always been Harriet Sumwells. The man who had claimed them had stolen the very proof that damned him. The magistrates found for her without troubling to leave the room. The crowd, which had come to see a poor niece put quietly down, sat in an odd silence. Something had turned in the room, the way weather turns. They had watched a quiet young woman stand up alone against a handsome man, and the whole weight of custom, with nothing on her side but a dead father's figures kept alive inside her head. They had watched her win, and they had watched the Duke of Wesley sit through the whole of it on a hard public bench, an orphan's small hand held fast in his. The cold Duke, the cursed Duke, the man they had all agreed for 3 years to fear. He had sat there plainly, humanly, on the side of the truth. The story the county had told itself for 3 years did not survive that afternoon. A better story began, slowly to be told in its place. Her uncle did not wait for the crowd to be done with him. He went out by a side door, a grey, handsome man, walking very upright into a ruin he had built with his own careful hands. Harriet watched him go. She did not smile. She asked the court, to the astonishment of everyone in the room, that no charge of theft be laid against him. She had her meadow. She had her name. She would not have his neck as well. There was nothing to be won by taking it but a satisfaction she found she did not want. That was the 4th thing she chose that season, and the county never quite forgot the sight of it. Olympia came to her afterward in the emptying room, when the crowd had gone out to talk it over on the steps. "You could have hanged him," she said. "You could have hanged us all," everyone in that room saw it. She was pale and strange, and her fine, practiced face had come a little apart at the seams. "Why did you not?" "Because I know what it is to have nothing," said Harriet, "and to be made to stand in a room full of people who wish you were not there. I would not do that to anyone, not even to him, not even, I find, to you." Olympia looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind the beautiful eyes, some small, late, first-of-its-kind thought, the beginning, perhaps, of a person the machine had never let her be. "He never looked at me," she said, "the way he looks at you." It was not spite. It was much nearer to wonder. "I do not think anyone has ever looked at me like that. I was only ever the finest thing in the room." She drew her pelisse straight, the old trained reflex. I hope he looks at you like that for 50 years. I mean it, which surprises me. I find I mean it entirely. She went out into her father's ruin to begin, though she did not yet know it, the slow and unglamorous work of becoming a real person. She would marry, in a year or two, a plain and kindly widower with a small estate and no coronet at all. She would be happier than she had ever been trained to imagine happiness could be. And she would send Harriet a stiff, warm letter every Christmas for the rest of both their lives. The merger was dead. There was no longer any reason on earth for the Duke of Wesley to marry a Sumwell. Harriet had her meadow now, free and clear, with a small independence in it. She had no uncle to stand behind. She had no cold dinner to stand through. The whole vast engine that had meant to grind her into a duchess for her uncle's profit had broken quietly to pieces. Out the far side of it, she had walked, for the first time in her life, a free woman who owed no living soul anything. She could take a cottage of her own. She could keep her own rents at last. She could, if she chose, never set foot in a great cold house again. Which meant that when the Duke came to her, he came to nothing but herself. He came the week after the hearing, down to the weir, where it had all begun. It was a clear, cold morning, the mended race running sweet and low, the high meadow greening where the flood had spread across it. He came alone. No groom, no steward, in the plain way he had first come to be shown the fall of the ground. He stood a moment looking at the water that had drowned his brother and saved his parish. Then he looked at her, and the dark face the county had sworn for 3 years was dead, was so plainly, painfully alive that she could hardly bear to look back. "There is no merger," he said. "There is no settlement. There is no reason of land, or law, or money for what I am about to say to you." "No," Harriet agreed quietly. "There is not. I made myself into a man no one would speak to," he said, "on purpose, because it was easier than being the man who killed his brother. And you stood up at a sideboard and answered me back. You have not once stopped answering me back since." His unused voice caught, and he let it, and did not look away. "You brought my brother's child up out of a north room. You spread a flood to save a village. You gave your enemy his neck, when you might have had it for the asking. I find that I would rather be spoken to by you every day of my life than be left in peace by the whole rest of the world. That is all I have to offer. There is no land in it, only that." Harriet looked at the man no one had dared to speak to. She made the last and freest choice she would ever make, the one no settlement compelled, no uncle arranged, no meadow required of her. "Barnaby," she said. She had never once used his name. She used it now, on purpose, the way one lays down, at last, a thing one has carried a very long way. "I did not answer you back because I was brave," she said. "I answered you because you were the first person in years who asked me a question, and then waited for the answer. I have been asked a great many questions since, in courts, in drawing rooms, by people who did not care in the least what I said." She stepped nearer, across the sweet running water. "You are still the only one who waits. I should like to spend my life answering you, on one condition." "Name it," he said. "Anything." "That the child comes out of the north room for good. That she is ours, both of ours. That we never once tidy her away again." Something broke across his hard face, and this time it was not grief. Yes, said the Duke of Wesley. God help me, yes. He did not sweep her up into his arms. He was not that sort of man, and she would not have loved him half so well if he had been. He took her cold hand in his cold hand at the very edge of the water, the way he had once let his fingers find the window-sill an inch from hers in the dark. They stood together at the mended weir, while the high meadow greened around them. For a while, they were simply two people who had, at long last, both been answered. He went up to the child himself that evening, for the first time. Harriet did not go with him. She understood that he had to do this one thing alone, just as he had once had to go down to the weir alone. She waited in the great hall while he climbed the stairs toward the north room, where his brother's daughter kept her small funerals. She heard the door open above her. She heard the high little voice go quiet with surprise. Then she heard, muffled through the old oak, the low, unused voice of the Duke of Wesley, speaking to Ralph's child for the first time in 3 years. She never learned exactly what he said to her. Some things are not for the repeating, even by a narrator who has told you everything else. But when he came down again at last, his face was wet, and he was not ashamed of it. A small girl came down, clinging to his hand, having decided, with a child's sudden and total certainty, that this large, sad man was hers now, and always had been. Bess looked up at Harriet from the bottom stair. "He came to find me," she said, wondering at it. "He knew where my room was. All this time." "He always knew, my love," said Harriet gently. "He only had to learn how to climb the stairs." That night, the north room stood empty for the first time in 3 years. The wooden horses were carried down to a bright nursery in the warm south front, where the morning sun came in early. No one buried anything the next day. No one buried anything the day after that. The great cold house had begun, at very long last, to learn a different set of games. They were married quietly, in the parish church, with Bess strewing a great deal more petals than one narrow aisle could hold. The Dowager Duchess Verena sat in the front pew, looking as though she had arranged the entire business herself, which, in the private history of glances and Thursday chocolate and careful dinner placements, she very nearly had. This is not the end of the story. That is the promise folded into it, and I mean to keep the promise honest with you. The great house did not turn warm in a single night. Grief does not empty out of a place the way water empties from a mended race. There were rooms still that Barnaby could not enter easily. There were mornings when the old silence came down over him without warning. There was a stone by the weir that Bess kept flowers on, and always would, and always should. Harriet did not mend him. That was never the office, and she had never mistaken it for the office. She only stood beside him steadily. She waited. She answered when he spoke. And in the waiting and the answering, the man came slowly, over the seasons, the rest of the way back into the world. There were small signs of it, for those who knew to look. He learned to say his brother's name aloud, without flinching. He rode out among his tenants, and let them speak to him, and answered when they did. He had the north room opened up and aired, and made into a schoolroom. A great map of the 2 joined estates was pinned upon its wall. There the child might learn her land, the way Harriet's father had once taught her. The valley watched the hard Duke turn slowly human, and marvelled, and forgot after a while that they had ever been afraid. This is where I will leave them. At the beginning of it, rather than at the tidy end. On a clear morning in the second spring, at the head of a table, she had asked them to make shorter, so that the people sitting at it might hear one another speak. Harriet Sumwell, who once was not given a chair at all, sat with her father's green book open on her knee, teaching a small, dark-haired girl to read the levels of the land. A tall man, who frightened no one any longer, leaned in the doorway to listen. He had learned that in this house one waits for the answer, and that the answer is always worth the waiting for. The whole valley had heard, by then, the thing the great house had been the very last to learn. The Duke of Wesley could be spoken to after all. He answered. Somewhere in the cold place, a woman in a plain gown had simply refused to be afraid of sad, and had opened a window, and kept it open, and let the spring come in. They had told her, once, to stand, and to hold her tongue. She stands now, because she chooses to, at the head of her own table. She has never once held her tongue since. And there is no one in that house, from the Duke in the doorway to the child on her knee, who would have her any other way.